Chosen one, anchor your spirit to what I am about to say right now. That restless feeling you cannot shake, the one that has been sitting in the back of your mind for the last 72 hours, this message is the answer to it. God is not trying to get your attention anymore. He has it, and what he is about to do is not gentle. It is not subtle. It is an arrest. It all shifts in the next 24 hours. The confusion, the stagnation, the silence. But hear me clearly, this is not shifting because of coincidence. It is shifting because of what you have been carrying in secret. The prayers no one heard, the restraint no one applauded, the loyalty you maintained when everything in you wanted to walk away. Think back to that moment this week when you almost broke, when you almost said what you felt, when you almost gave them a piece of your mind, when you almost went back to what God told you to leave. You pulled back, you went silent, you stayed. You did not know it then, but that moment of restraint was not weakness. That was the turning point. That was the moment heaven moved on your behalf. You did not stumble onto this message. The algorithm did not surface this for you. God did. This is a divine appointment that was written before the foundations of the earth were laid. You are not early. You are not late. You are exactly on time for what is about to be revealed. Stay until the very last second of this message, because in the next few minutes, I am going to hand you the spiritual verdict that names what is being arrested in your life right now. I am going to walk you through the exact warning God has been releasing in your spirit this week, so you can finally understand what that unease has been pointing to. And at the end, I am going to give you a declaration that seals the arrest warrant and closes the door on everything that has had access to your peace, your purpose, and your promise. Do not click away. Your future self is on the other side of this message. If you leave now, you leave before the verdict is read. And this is not a verdict you want to miss. I know what the last 72 hours have felt like. The atmosphere has not just been quiet, it has been charged. Like something is about to break open but has not yet. Like standing in the doorway of a room where something significant just happened and the air is still holding the weight of it. Maybe you have been moving through your days on the outside, but somewhere on the inside something feels frozen. Maybe you woke up at 3 in the morning this week and your mind went immediately to a situation you thought you had surrendered, and you lay there in the dark, wondering if God had forgotten. Or maybe you have been sitting with a decision that should feel clear, but every time you try to move forward, something in your chest locks up, and you do not know if that is fear or if that is God saying stop. You feel suspended, like you are standing between two worlds, the one you are leaving and the one you have been promised. And in that in-between space, the enemy has started whispering a very specific lie. He is telling you that the reason everything feels stalled is because you missed your moment. He is replaying a specific scene in your memory. That moment when you did not speak up. That moment when you walked away from the assignment because it cost too much. That moment when you chose silence, and now you are wondering if your silence was surrender. The accuser is telling you that because of that moment, you have delayed your own breakthrough. That God is waiting on you to do something you already failed to do. But I need you to hear what the scripture actually says about this season. Nahum 1009 says, "What do you conspire against the Lord? He will make an utter end of it. Affliction shall not rise up the second time." Sit with that promise. Affliction shall not rise up the second time. The enemy is working overtime to convince you that you are back at the beginning, that because of what you did or did not do, you have been sent back to the starting line, and this is just another lap around the same wilderness. That is a deception. You are not in a cycle, you are in a conclusion. And the arrest that is coming is not an arrest of your destiny. It is an arrest of everything that has been standing between you and it. The heaviness you feel right now is not the weight of punishment. It is the weight of finality. It is the pressure that builds in the atmosphere right before something breaks. Right before something that has been locked for years is suddenly opened. Right before the thing that has been chasing you is suddenly stopped in its tracks. That moment when you stayed silent instead of reacting was not a defeat. That moment when you walked away instead of engaging was not a retreat. That was a divine strategy. and God is about to show you exactly what it purchased. There are moments in life when God doesn't whisper. He arrests, not with chains, not with punishment, but with a divine interruption so precise, so personal, that everything you thought you were building suddenly goes still. And if you're watching this right now, something in your spirit already knows. This is one of those moments. Some messages don't just inform, they activate. If something stirred deep in your spirit just now, you may be ready to receive the Chosen One's blueprint. This sacred guide reveals the 8 divine patterns behind your calling, your suffering, and your destiny. It also comes with the full audiobook, so you can absorb it during prayer, rest, or quiet moments with God. And for those called to speak His truth, you'll also receive Activating Your Prophet Mantle, a powerful bonus ebook for those carrying a prophetic assignment. The link is in the first pinned comment, but only for a limited time. Now stay with me, because what I'm about to walk you through is not theory. This is the anatomy of divine intervention, and most people who experience it don't understand what's happening until it's already over. The reason so many chosen people feel stuck right now is not because God has forgotten them. It's because they have misread the silence. They've interpreted the pause as punishment. They've looked at what's been taken, the relationship, the opportunity, the momentum, and concluded that something went wrong. But here's what C.S. Lewis understood that most modern voices refuse to say: God is not interested in your comfort, He is interested in your completion. And completion requires a kind of breaking that comfort will never produce. Comfort is a kind of anesthesia. It numbs the edges of longing and softens the sharp call of transformation until you no longer feel its edges at all. And so God, who loves you too fiercely to allow you to sleepwalk through your destiny, sometimes reaches into the middle of what felt settled, what felt safe, what felt like yours. And He stops it. He halts the momentum. He silences the noise, not because your story is over, but because the chapter you were writing was not the chapter He ordained. And in the abrupt stillness that follows, in that breathless, disorienting, sacred pause, that is where the real work begins. Think about this. When a bone is set incorrectly after a fracture, a surgeon doesn't simply encourage it to heal better. He breaks it again, at the point of original injury, not out of cruelty, but because a bone that heals in the wrong position will limit movement for the rest of your life. And God, who sees the full architecture of your destiny, will sometimes re-break what healed wrong, not because He is harsh, but because He is precise. The arrest you are experiencing right now may not be a sign that you failed. It may be the sign that He finally trusts you enough to fix what was set wrong the first time. That surgical image is not accidental. A surgeon who re-breaks a misaligned bone does so only when the patient is ready to endure it, only when the body is strong enough to survive the correction and rebuild properly from the wound. There is a strange, stunning mercy embedded in that truth. It means that the pain you are in right now is not evidence of God's distance. It may be evidence of His proximity. It may mean that He has assessed your capacity, looked at the full landscape of what you carry, and determined that you are finally strong enough, not to avoid the re-breaking, but to survive it and come out on the other side moving in ways you never could before. What feels like devastation is actually surgical precision. What feels like loss is actually the removal of a limitation you couldn't see clearly enough to release on your own. But here's where it goes deeper, and this is the part most people skip past, because it requires a level of honesty that is deeply uncomfortable. The thing that was set wrong is not always what the enemy did to you. Sometimes it is what you chose in the middle of your pain. When Elijah ran from Jezebel after the fire fell on Mount Carmel, he didn't run because he was weak. He ran because he was exhausted. He had just experienced one of the greatest spiritual victories in the history of Israel. And in the very next moment, a single threat from one woman sent him under a juniper tree, asking God to take his life. And what did God do? He didn't rebuke him. He fed him. He let him sleep. He sent an angel twice. But then, and this is critical, He asked him a question that cut through everything. What are you doing here, Elijah? Not what happened to you. Not who hurt you. What are you doing here? Because the issue wasn't the threat from Jezebel. The issue was that Elijah had built his identity on the fire coming down, and when the fire didn't stop the persecution, he didn't know who he was without the visible miracle, and God was arresting that misplacement before it became a permanent limp in his destiny. Sit with that for a moment. God's question to Elijah was not a reprimand, it was an excavation. It was God reaching past the surface of the exhaustion, past the understandable fear, past the legitimate grief, and going directly to the root. What are you doing here? Meaning, this cave, this hiding place, this posture of defeat. It does not belong to your identity. You are not a man of the cave. You are a man of the mountain. You are a man of fire and wind and the still small voice. How did you end up here? And more importantly, why are you staying? Because the question was not just geographical, it was prophetic. It was God refusing to allow Elijah to establish a permanent residence in the lowest point of his journey. You may have done the same thing. You may have built your identity on what God did through you, instead of who God made you to be. And now that the visible fire has gone quiet, you don't know who you are in the silence. That is the hidden fracture. That is what the arrest is targeting. There is a profound difference between a calling and an identity, and yet so many people collapse the two until they are indistinguishable. When the calling produces fruit, when the ministry grows, when the gift is celebrated, when the prayers are visibly answered and the results are undeniable, it is dangerously easy to begin locating your sense of self inside the outcome, rather than inside your relationship with the one who called you. And so, when the outcomes shift, when the visible manifestation goes quiet, when the season turns and the fruit stops appearing on the branches you were certain were permanently yours, something inside you panics. Because you have mistaken the gift for the giver, you have mistaken the evidence of God for God himself. And that confusion, left uncorrected, will hollow out your spiritual life from the inside, leaving you performing for an audience when you were called to a presence. And this leads us to something most people miss entirely. Coming up in just a moment, the principle that explains why your greatest breakthroughs have always followed your deepest losses. But first, this has to land. The arrest is not the end of your story. It is the surgical theater. It is the moment God gets behind the wound, behind the performance, behind the spiritual reputation, behind the carefully constructed version of yourself you've been presenting to the world, and begins working on what only He can see. C.S. Lewis wrote that God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. Pain is His megaphone. But what He is shouting is not condemnation. What He is shouting is direction. He is saying, not that way, this way, here, now, stop. And that directional shout, that urgent, precise, unavoidable redirection, is an act of the deepest love imaginable. Think about the image of a parent watching a child about to step into oncoming traffic. The shout that fills that moment is not anger. It is terror transformed into action. It is love that has no time to be gentle, because gentleness in that moment would cost everything. And God, who sees beyond the veil of what is visible, who perceives the full weight of what is coming toward you and what is being prepared for you, sometimes shouts not because you are in trouble, but because He is trying to redirect you before you settle permanently into something that cannot contain your destiny. Most people respond to that shout by trying to make the pain stop as quickly as possible. They pray for immediate relief. They seek counsel to get back to normal. They fast to accelerate the process. And there is nothing wrong with any of those things, except when they are used to escape what God is trying to do inside the difficulty. Because the goal is not to survive the arrest. The goal is to be transformed by it. There is a version of spiritual practice that is really just spiritual pain management. It looks like faith from the outside, the prayers, the declarations, the worship. But at its core, it is a sophisticated attempt to return to comfort as quickly as possible. And God, who is not deceived by the packaging, will sometimes allow those efforts to go unanswered, precisely because, answered too quickly, they would interrupt the very process He initiated. Not every prayer for relief is meant to be answered immediately. Some prayers for relief are meant to draw you deeper into the presence of the one who is holding you in the very season you are trying to escape. And in that deeper place, in that sustained and sometimes agonizing encounter with the God who will not release you from the process prematurely, that is where the transformation actually happens. That is where Elijah stops being a man defined by fire and becomes a man defined by relationship with the God who speaks in the silence after the fire has passed. Now, once you understand that, you're ready for this. There is a pattern in Scripture that almost no one talks about because it is deeply counterintuitive. Every person God used at the highest level was not just tested. They were specifically tested in the area of their calling. Moses, called to lead, was placed in a position of total powerlessness for 40 years. David, anointed as king, was hunted like a criminal for nearly a decade. Paul, appointed as the apostle to the nations, spent years in chains. Joseph, whose entire assignment was about divine elevation, spent more time in pits and prisons than in palaces. The pattern is not coincidental. The pattern is intentional, because God does not give authority to people who have not been proven in the absence of it. He does not release influence to those who have not survived the silence of invisibility. The arrest you are in right now may be the very prerequisite for the assignment God has written over your life before you were born. Let that pattern breathe in your spirit for a moment. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness, not as a punishment for the Egyptian he struck down in a moment of misguided zeal, but as a formation, because the man who would stand before Pharaoh and part the Red Sea could not be the same man who thought he could liberate Israel through his own strength, his own royal status, his own act of violence. That man had to be stripped. He had to become a shepherd in the desert, tending flocks on the backside of nowhere, unknown and unmemorable by every earthly measure, so that when God finally spoke from the burning bush, Moses would have nothing left to stand on except God himself. The wilderness didn't weaken Moses. The wilderness dismantled everything in Moses that would have gotten in the way of God's glory being the only thing visible in the deliverance. And David, beloved, anointed, celebrated after Goliath, spent years living in caves, fleeing a king who had once celebrated him. He wrote psalms in the dark. He wept in places no one would see. He cried out to a God who seemed distant while enemies surrounded him on every side. And in those years of hiding, something was being built in David that the throne could never have produced, a heart after God that had been forged not in triumph, but in anguish. The Psalms we return to in our own darkest moments were written in David's darkest moments. The very seasons of his greatest pain became the legacy of his greatest intimacy with God. And the authority he carried when he finally sat on the throne was not the authority of a man who had never suffered. It was the authority of a man who had suffered completely and discovered that God was sufficient in every layer of it. Stay with me, because what's coming next is the insight that breaks the cycle. And it's the one thing most people avoid. Here is what almost no one is willing to say out loud. Some of what's been arrested in your life needed to be arrested, not because it was sinful, but because it was premature. There is such a thing as good fruit produced out of season. There is such a thing as a right thing at the wrong time that, if it had continued, would have produced a version of your destiny that looked right on the outside but was hollow at the root. God is not only interested in what you build, He is interested in what you build from, because a ministry built from unhealed ambition will eventually collapse under its own unresolved wounds. A relationship entered from a place of spiritual desperation will mirror the emptiness it was meant to fill. A calling walked out, before character has been formed, will produce influence without integrity. And influence without integrity is one of the most dangerous things a person can carry. Consider a tree planted in shallow soil. For a season, it may grow quickly. Its branches spread wide, its leaves catch the attention of every passerby, its fruit appears early and in abundance. But when the storm comes, and storms always come, the root system cannot hold what the visible growth has promised, and it falls. not because it was the wrong tree, not because it lacked potential, but because the soil beneath it was never deep enough to sustain what was asked of it. God is a long-game gardener. He is not impressed by early shoots. He is interested in root systems that can withstand generations of storms, root systems that go deep enough to drink from underground rivers when the surface goes completely dry. And sometimes the most loving thing he can do for a life that is growing too fast in too shallow soil is to stop the visible growth entirely and redirect all the energy downward, into the hidden place, into the dark, unseen, unglamorous work of going deeper rather than growing taller. God arrested it not because he didn't trust your gifting. He arrested it because he is building something that has to last beyond your moment, and what lasts requires a foundation that can only be laid in the hidden place. The hidden place. That phrase deserves its own meditation, because in a culture that celebrates visibility, the hidden place feels like exile. It feels like irrelevance. It feels like God has moved on and left you in a room where no one is watching and nothing is happening. But the hidden place is not where God abandons the work. The hidden place is where God does the work that cannot be done in public. It is the place where the identity questions get settled without an audience to perform for. It is where the ambition gets examined and refined and surrendered until it is no longer your engine but his instrument. It is where the wounds that were driving the calling get finally, fully healed, so that the calling is no longer contaminated by what it was trying to compensate for. The hidden place is not the waiting room before your assignment. For many people, the hidden place is the assignment. The place where the most essential, most eternal, most irreplaceable work of your life is being done in silence. And this brings us to the real turning point, the one most people are not ready for. The invitation inside the arrest is not to pray your way back to where you were. The invitation is to let go of where you were completely. Because where you were was not where you were going. It was where you were formed, and you have confused the forming place with the destination. You have looked back at what was taken and called it your promise, when God was actually calling it your preparation. The Israelites in the wilderness didn't lose Egypt. They were liberated from it, but they spent 40 years asking to go back, because the familiar captivity felt safer than the unfamiliar promise. And God, in his mercy, would not let them return, not because he was cruel, but because he could see what they could not, that Egypt had no room for what they were about to become. Egypt is one of the most penetrating images in all of Scripture, for the human experience of attachment to limitation. Here were a people who had been enslaved, genuinely, brutally, generationally enslaved, and yet when the wilderness got difficult, when the manna felt monotonous, when the destination felt impossibly distant, what they longed for was not just food. What they longed for was the familiar architecture of a life they knew how to survive, even if that life was one of chains. Because chains, if you have worn them long enough, stop feeling like chains and start feeling like structure. They stop feeling like oppression and start feeling like orientation. You know where you stand in them. You know what is expected of you. And the terrifying openness of freedom, the unmapped, untamed, promise-filled expanse of a life without ceiling, is far more frightening to a people whose identity has been shaped by limitation than the slavery they left behind. What Egypt have you been mourning? What loss have you dressed up in the language of faith, calling it your promise when it was actually your limitation, wearing a familiar face? That is a question worth sitting with in total silence, because the answer is rarely obvious. The Egypt you have been mourning rarely looks like Egypt from the inside. It looks like the relationship that gave you identity, even if it kept you small. It looks like the position that gave you relevance, even if it kept you performing for approval rather than living from purpose. It looks like the version of yourself that people celebrated, even if that version was a carefully maintained persona built over the ruins of your truest self. The Egypt you are grieving has a name, and it is a name only you and God know. And the invitation right now is to stop dressing it in the language of loss and start seeing it for what it actually was, the container that had to be broken so that what God placed inside you could no longer be contained, But let me challenge you with something, because this is where the message goes from confronting to completely transforming. The deepest layer of what this arrest is exposing is not your unbelief. It is not your sin pattern. It is not even your fear. It is your agreement with a smaller version of yourself that you made peace with somewhere along the way. There was a moment, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, when the vision God placed in you felt too large, too audacious, too far from where you were standing. And instead of holding the tension between who you were and who He said you would become, you quietly negotiated downward. You told yourself it was humility. You called it being realistic. You surrounded yourself with people who confirmed the smaller version because the larger one required too much from everyone around you. And then you built a life around the negotiated version and called it surrender. But it was not surrender. It was a settlement. And God is arresting the settlement right now because the settlement was never the covenant. Humility is one of the most misused words in the spiritual vocabulary of people who are afraid of their own calling. True humility is not the diminishment of what God placed in you. True humility is the total acknowledgement that what God placed in you did not originate with you, and therefore cannot be scaled down by your opinion of your own worthiness. When you look at a gift and say, "This is too big for someone like me," you are not being humble, you are being inaccurate. You are applying your own limited assessment to something that God assessed before He formed you in the womb. You are holding a masterwork up to a dim light and calling it ordinary because you are afraid of what it would cost to believe it is exactly what it appears to be. That is not humility. That is self-protective unbelief wearing humility's clothing. And God, who will not share His glory, will also not allow His purposes to be reduced to the size of your insecurity. The arrest is the moment He begins to dismantle the settlement and reclaim the full territory of the covenant. And here is the part you probably didn't expect, the part that reframes everything you've just heard. The warning is not about what's coming against you. The warning is about what's trying to come through you, that you keep talking yourself out of. The arrest is not God stopping you. The arrest is God stopping you from stopping yourself. The enemy you have been watching for is not outside you. It has been the internal agreement that says you are too late, too broken, too ordinary, too unknown to carry what heaven has actually assigned to your life. And until that agreement is broken, not just acknowledged, not just prayed about, but completely dismantled, the breakthrough that has already been released in the Spirit will continue to wait at the threshold of your obedience. That threshold is a real place. It is not a metaphor. In the Spirit, there is a place where what God has already spoken and what you have not yet received are separated by nothing more than your willingness to cross from the conversation into the commitment. The breakthrough has been authorized. The resources have been allocated. The assignment has a name on it, and that name is yours. But a breakthrough that has been authorized in heaven still requires agreement on earth. It still requires a human being who is willing to stop negotiating, stop shrinking, stop explaining to God all the reasons why the timing is wrong or the vessel is insufficient, and simply say yes. A full, unqualified, irrevocable yes that moves out of the forming place and into the fullness, even when the fullness is still largely invisible. This is your moment of crossing, not because everything is perfect, not because the fear is gone, not because the fear is gone, not because the path is clear, but because God has brought you to this exact message, on this exact day, in this exact season, and that is not an accident. That is precision. That is the hand of the Most High reaching into your timeline and saying, now. This is where we change the trajectory. This is where the arrest becomes the activation. The crossing never happens in conditions of complete visibility. That is the nature of faith. It is always required at the edge of what you can see. The Israelites stood at the bank of the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army behind them and nothing but water in front of them. There was no path. There was no bridge. There was no earthly reason to believe that forward was possible. But Moses lifted his staff and the waters parted, not before the step was taken, but as the step was being taken. The miracle met the movement. The provision appeared at the border of the obedience. And what looked like an impossible ending became the most dramatic testimony of God's faithfulness in the entire history of a nation. Your Red Sea moment is not behind you, it is in front of you. And the staff in your hand is not your plan, not your reputation, not your resources. It is your willingness, your raw, trembling, fully surrendered willingness to take the next step and trust that the God who parted water for a nation of former slaves has not exhausted his capacity for impossible things on your behalf. Place your hand on your heart and declare this with me. I release every settlement I made in the place of fear. I break every agreement I signed with a smaller version of myself. I let go of the Egypt I had been mourning, and I receive the promise I had been too afraid to fully believe. The silence was not abandonment. It was preparation. The loss was not punishment. It was positioning. I step out of the forming place and into the fullness of what God designed before I drew my first breath. I am not behind. I am not forgotten. I am not disqualified. I am being arrested by grace so that I can be released into destiny. And from this moment forward, I walk not in the confidence of what I can produce, but in the certainty of what God has already ordained. It is done. It is real. And I receive it now. Let that declaration settle into the deepest places in you. Let it reach into the rooms of your spirit where the smaller agreements were signed, and let it revoke every one of them by name. Because there is genuine spiritual authority in a declaration that is made not from what you feel, but from what you know, not from what is visible in front of you, but from what God has written over you. This is not positive thinking. This is covenant activation. This is a child of God, standing in the full authority of an identity that was settled before the foundation of the world, and refusing, in this moment, on this day, to live any smaller than the God who made them. If this message reached something deep in you today, don't let it pass without acting on it. Share it with someone who needs to hear that their silence is not a sign of abandonment. Leave a comment telling God and yourself what you are releasing today. And if you want to go deeper into understanding your divine assignment and why your journey has unfolded exactly the way it has, the link in the first pinned comment is waiting for you. This is not the end of the message. For some of you, this is the beginning of everything.